Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Western Cape Teachers Forum platform where we educate, empower, and excel. Now, you may have wondered where have we been for the last few while. We understand that this time is a very busy time for teachers, especially because of marking assessments and obviously schedules and getting all those things ready for next year. And so we thought we'd give you guys a break. Now, tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking on the issue of transformation and racial segregation in our schools. And because this is a very emotive and sensitive topic, we know we always encourage everybody to participate in the discussion and to share their views. We welcome that, but our plea here tonight really is for us to participate respectfully, because we may have different views, and that's perfectly fine. But as long as we subject ourselves to professional conduct, we are all good to go. Now, obviously, about 26 years into a democracy, the South African Human Rights Commission still investigates a substantial number of cases relating to racial discrimination and hate speech. And so recent events at a Cape Town high school once again placed the spotlight on this very issue. And so it forced us to think whether we are where we ought to be as the so-called Rainbow Nation. And so to make sense of some of these issues, we've again decided to talk or to speak to somebody who needs absolutely no introduction, Professor Jonathan Jansen, to share some insights around transformation and race relations in our schools. Now, he was a former guest on the show, and we certainly appreciate his presence here tonight. Prof, good evening to you.
Lee Hoffmann, good evening, and to your viewers, good to be with you.
Well, thank you once again, sir. Now, before we get into the flesh and bone of tonight's topic, one crucially important aspect that 2020 has reminded us about is the issue of mental and emotional health for both educator and learner, and perhaps parents as well. And so I'm suddenly reminded about the tragedy at La Rochelle Girls High School, where two learners unfortunately took their lives. And so it's something that still needs our urgent attention as parents, as teachers, as a community. Do you have a quick thought to speak on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I was, I know La Rochelle quite well. I used to go there often to do leadership camps for high schoolers, and it breaks your heart, when two young people apparently took their own lives, and it's a reminder, that school is not just about intellectual achievement. School is also about security for young people. It's about emotional reassurance in a pandemic. It's about spiritual comfort in difficult times. Schools have many functions, especially in poorer communities where there's not much to back you up, in your disadvantage. So, no, my heart goes out to those children, but also to all our children who have been struggling to both deal with these ridiculous demands of the department to do exams and assessments and give you 5% and all this nonsense. Instead of just allowing the year to pass, allowing the children to be promoted, allowing the teachers not to be stressed about marking and assessments and all that, and just try and be kind and generous in these difficult times. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I cannot agree with you more. And I mean, again, our heart go out to the families affected, as well as the school and the staff of that particular school. Now, Prof, tonight's topic is a sensitive one, but I want to kickstart the conversation by saying the following: we are all born innocent, but at some stage we become racially wounded. Now, how does that happen?
Yeah, Nelson Mandela had a beautiful statement on this, making your point. No child is born, with racism. You become like that, And in South Africa, with our very long history, I did a book called Knowledge in the Blood, and it's really about white Afrikaans-speaking youth. And what was fascinating to me, having worked with them for almost 9 years, was how the church, the NG Kerk in particular, the rugby club, the cultural, associations, voortrekkers, junior voortrekkers, all this stuff, the primary school, the high school, the university, and the home, together were interlocking, institutions that gave them a sense of themselves as superior, of Black people as inferior, as the past as glorious, as the future as dark, if you know what I mean. And so you come, by the time I got them at university as 18-year-olds, they already thought they knew the world. They already thought that black people were inherently incompetent. Like myself, they came in with an understanding that they were born to rule, so to speak. And at first I was irritated by that, obviously. And then I got to love them. I got to care for them. I got to understand that this was the reaction of the defeated, as Professor Chobani Mangani so beautifully put it. It's the response of the defeated. And just imagine all your life, you've been taught white supremacy, right? And then one day you meet somebody like me as your dean, and you suddenly meet a whole lot of people that I'm hiring who are white and black from all over the world. And your entire world falls apart because you've been lied to. So now you do one of two things. You do what Trump supporters do, and you deny the reality, and you go completely nuts. Or you break down and your whole world, this thing is difficult. And as Black South Africans, myself included, we often approach this from the point of view of the righteous. We were the victims and now we're the righteous. But spare a thought for somebody, it's the equivalent of waking up. I've thought about this a lot. It's the equivalent of one day your parents calling you together and saying, Lee, we love you very much, okay? But we just want to tell you we're not actually your parents. You know what would happen as a young person.
Sure.
You'd fall apart. Doesn't mean they didn't love you. It just means that whatever you thought was true is not. That's a quote from a famous book. And so I always looked at the situation, not from the point of view of condemning people for their racism, that I do too, but from the point of view, oh my word, just imagine you woke up and everything you thought about black people is a lie. Everything you thought about yourself is a lie. That's a hard adjustment to make for a young person.
Sure. So it's years of conditioning, as it were. Now, and we know that racism and discrimination are institutionalized and are embedded in the structures of some of our institutions. Now, to mention a few of the examples that made the mainstream media recently, well, not recently, a few years ago, we remember the Pretoria Girls High debacle around the racist hairstyle regulations. There was Durban Girls College 5 months ago that's also in the news. There was Hoërskool School Rhino Park in Emmaslageni, where the principal and 2 teachers were suspended for labeling learners derogatory names. And then, of course, the Schweizer Reinicke incident as well. Now, from a leadership perspective of these or some of our schools, how do we adopt a more inclusive approach or culture? How do we begin to break down some of these things that prevent us from becoming an all-inclusive society, or schools rather?
It depends who the we is, right? So if the we is the principal of Bishops or the principal of Pretoria Boys High School or the principal of these elite institutions, they don't want to change. And that's something as black people we must understand. They will pretend they're changing, but they don't actually want to change, okay? And unfortunately, there isn't enough political incentive for them to change. So what Namibia did, I studied 3 national school systems. One is Namibia, the other Zimbabwe, and South Africa. So what Namibia did after independence in 1980, they basically posted all the white principals to other schools and all the black principals to white schools, and they just did it. South Africa didn't do that because of the kind of settlement we have, and also because there's a lot more white people here, so you'd be in trouble politically. But you must understand, white schools do not want to change. If you don't, I've been working with them now for decades. They don't want to change. They'll tell you they're changing. They'll talk about the isiZulu teacher in grade 1, but they don't actually want to change, okay? And the reason is white privilege. The reason is white supremacist thinking. They really think they're better. So the first thing you'd hear a white school tell you when you tell them, but we're the black teachers, what's the first thing they tell you? We can't find good black teachers. That's such a load of BS, as you know, because they won't give a black teacher the same opportunity that they give a young white teacher. I've trained both of them. I've just, graduated 280 PGCE students, black and white, okay, in equal numbers. There's smart ones among them on both sides. There's dumb ones among them on both sides. It's got nothing to do with your color. It's got, you're just good or you're not good. But they pretend that the only rugby player, the only cricket player, the only, grade 7 science and tech teacher is white. And that's the natural order of things. So you can't expect people to change who don't want to change. And so in our book, Who Gets In and Why, on the southern suburbs line of schools, we made it very, very clear they are not going to change. And one of the reasons they won't change is because this government wants its children, essentially a black government, right? Wants its children at Westerford. They want their children at Rondebosch Boys Junior. They want their children at St. Cyprian's. And so they are not going to, disturb the peace, if you know what I mean, or the injustice rather, because of this convergence of interest, and we'd be a bit academic for a minute, of the black middle class and of white South Africans. They are comfortable in that niche, and to hell with the kids in Khayelitsha, to hell with the kids in Mitchell's Plain, because they're not part of this bigger picture. So unless there's political pressure to change, the schools will not change by themselves. Having said that, let me also be clear, there are individual schools who have progressive principles who do exactly that. My favorite school is called Pinelands North Primary, also known in the area as the Red School. We've got a chapter in our book with Samantha Krieger on that school. Have you ever heard of a school with transgender bathrooms? Anywhere in the world. A primary school, my bro, anywhere in the world, okay, with transgender bathrooms, with a rich variety of black and white teachers, with animals on the premises that can make the school a calm place for children with various kinds of emotional and psychological difficulties. That's my South African school. So I don't want to say all the schools are like that, but the overwhelming majority, of the elite schools, public and private, don't want to change. And that is why the Brackenfell thing for me was like, stop making a fuss about Brackenfell. I can take you to 10 schools in that same area right now, where the situation is bad. So it's purely political opportunism, as you know, on the part of the EFF, which really upsets me, because the problem is systemic. The problem isn't one school. And now everybody's gone home, and Brackenfell is still sitting there, and they'll still sit the way they are. But I'm going there with a colleague of mine, Rudy Bass, and we are, we basically say, you got to invite us, okay? Because you don't know what to do. You don't know how to get out of this hole. We can help you get out of this hole. But just to summarize, Lee, white schools, by and large, because of their privilege and because of the lack of political pressure, don't want to change, and that's a fact.
So it would seem to me, apart from, whilst we've ended the policies on racial segregation and apartheid and all of that, we still battle with the issue of integration. So am I summing it up correctly?
You're correct. Let me just give you one policy instrument that we studied in some detail, okay? So most schools, even though they'll deny it, has a zoning policy. The department, including the WCED, says we won't interfere with the schools. We won't tell them where to draw the line. But if you're a school in a good part of Rondebosch, good wealthy parts, you know that if you stretch that line of the zone, you stretch the zone beyond Milner Road, okay? Then you're getting into Rondebosch East, and God help you, because all the Muslims are going to come over that road, okay? I mean, this is what people actually tell us. This is how, I don't know what people think I am, but they actually volunteer that information. And so you have, a combination of racism, of religious bigotry, of all of those things. It's within the power of the school to move that line, that zoning line, okay, beyond Milner Road, if you know what I mean. They would rather take white kids from Milnerton, white kids from Hout Bay, who come in over those lines, who are not within the zone, but they won't change. But they sit and they give you coffee and tea as a researcher and smile, and they're actually very nice, But in the meantime, they are destroying the chances for all children. You know what one of the biggest motivations for me is for integrated schools? This might shock you. The biggest reason I want integrated schools is not so much because of the black kids. It's because of these bloody white kids. It's because they will grow up thinking that the only person who can teach me science is white. That I am better than the black kid sitting next to me because it's a domestic child who's got very low social, cultural capital comes in and so on. They've never said, you know what, when I was in the Free State, you know what one of the biggest challenges was for white kids? Is I went to Durban, I went to Cape Town, I went to the top schools in the country to bring in students. Not only the ones who went to township schools, I have an obligation to those students, obviously, but also black kids who came from, some of the fancy schools, so that they could sit in the same classroom with white kids, which is why we eventually got rid of the Afrikaans policy because it was segregating students. And they would sit and they say, oh my Lord, this kid next to me in genetics or in actuarial science is getting better marks than me. You don't have to preach about the idiocy of white supremacy. You just bring people together, okay? And you level the playing field, if you know what I mean. So it can be done, and there are individual principals and schools doing this in all the 9 provinces. But by and large, white people don't want to change, and there's no incentive politically for them to change either.
All right, let's move along. Now, just one thing that I think you've mentioned it in the previous discussion or talk that you've had. I can't remember where it was, but the correlation between school fees and the non-inclusive culture of a school.
Yeah, no, this is a big thing, right? So even a place like Brackenfell, which is not going to charge you bishop's fees, right? But the fees are high enough that the people in that area who are not generally wealthy, it's not Van Riebeeck High School in the Cape. These are people who are lower middle class, some working class, who send their kids there. But even a fee of 10,000, 15,000 rand a year is impossible for somebody from Bellville South. It's impossible for somebody from, the African townships in the area. And so automatically you exclude, by virtue of the fees. But the fees in and of themselves don't exclude. It's all of these policies working together that exclude effectively. The policy on siblings, the policy on zoning, the policy on heritage. My parents studied there, you come in automatically, which is so ridiculously inequitable. The policy on social selection, which we have a chapter about in our book. And what is fascinating, English culture for me is devastating, because it works to select you. So these are some of the interview questions we found they ask at some of these schools. What book does your father read to you at night before you go to sleep? Now listen, if you come from where I do in the retreat in Steenberg, your father doesn't read a book to you at night before you go to sleep, okay? That's a middle-class sensibility, right? Your father is moeg, your father's come home from working for tramways or whatever, and your father is dog tired, he doesn't read you a book. That's a privilege you have if you got money. But in those ways, what's very effective, they can suss you out. What, but they also do it to white kids. So this is very interesting. In one school, we found twins, okay? Mm-hmm. These twins, their father went to this particular school in the southern suburbs, a very, very expensive public school, by the way. But because the one twin became a doctor and the other one a panel beater, they only took the one, these were 2 boys from the same family, from 2 brothers, and the one, his father became a doctor, the other one's father became a panel beater. The panel beater's son didn't stand a chance of getting in, but the doctor's son did. So there's a class element to it, there is a race element to it, there is a culture element to it. How do you speak your English, for example? And if in these ways the schools, with all those instruments together, stay white, stay wealthy, and stay as they were for decades.
Sure, this is some harsh, well, some interesting comments, not harsh, sorry. Now, Prof, if you had the opportunity to change the name of or names of some schools today, which ones would you change and why would you do that?
Look, I believe in symbolic restitution. In other words, a statue like Rhodes at UCT is offensive. It's offensive to enjoy pride of prominence given the history of colonialism and apartheid in our country. So symbolic restitution is a very important part because by keeping up the names of schools, for example, you show insensitivity to people who suffered. You know, how many of those schools? We've just had a very important landmark in the history of slavery these past few days. Do you know of any schools that stopped everything and paid attention to slavery in the Cape? You know, nobody did, or very few. I don't know of any who did. So why the hell is your school's name still Settlers High School? Okay, and don't give me this crap that, oh, there are famous cricketers who went to Settlers. Settlers is about settlers. It's about people who settled here. It's about people who made their, took your land and so on and so forth. So for heaven's sake, think of the names of people, if you must use the names of people, who represent not the settlers, but the post-settler community, that represents all of us, including white people. It's not for me a black-white exchange game. Just to give an example. One of our residences at the University of the Free State was called JBM Herzog. Okay. And JBM Herzog gave us those terrible bills in the 36, I think, and so on that basically took away voting rights, even on a limited franchise basis for Africans, etc. And in 56, of course, for so-called colored people. Why the hell must I entertain the name of a fascist, of a JBM Herzog, at a university in post-apartheid South Africa? But I said to my colleagues, what we're not going to do is simply replace this horrible person with a white guy, with a black guy. Why don't we replace him with a radical, progressive white guy? So you know what the name of JBM Herzog is today? It's called Beyers no Deer. Yeah, because we must never make this out to be a race thing. It's about social justice. It's not about paying people back. So in addition to settlers, since we're in the Cape, let me just tell you, for your program, WCTF, the other school I would go for to change the name is DF Milan. Okay? TF Milan, this is the guy who gave us apartheid. He's the first prime minister, in 48. Where did the penny not drop? What am I missing here? So as I said to the outgoing principal of settlers, don't wait for the trouble to come to you. Make your changes during peace times. No guarantee of peace, but at least you're doing the right thing. DF Milan and settlers' names are absolutely unacceptable in this day and age. And they need to change because it fortifies the kind of thinking in the minds of people who haven't changed, that it is okay, Mandela reconciled all of us, we'll keep the names of people who hurt us in place, etc., etc. So these things can be done, but as I said, done not in a way that just replaces white nationalists with black nationalists. I have no time for that. But to really reflect the diversity of our country in the naming. And by the way, I don't even think the naming people after politicians is a good thing anyway. We've got enough wildflowers, we've got enough great researchers, I just discovered this week one of the greatest young researchers in philosophy of language from Mitchell's Plain. Okay, why can't we name things after researchers, after flowers, after planets, after... But you name it after people, and there's always trouble.
All right, Prof, we about to land the plane. I think the time is far spent here. As I know, the minute we get into the flesh and bone of the conversation, time seems to pass us by very, very fast. Now, I want to believe, Prof Jansen, despite all the challenges that we have in the education sector, we have a vast number of colleagues, teachers, and education sector workers that are progressive, that are forward-thinking, that are solution-driven, especially our young educators. Now, it's very easy to get distracted by all the noise around you as a young educator, and it's very easy to lose your fire that you had in year one as opposed to where you are now, because there's so many things. I mean, besides what we're talking about now, there's the administrative overload, there's the curriculum issues, and so many other things. How do we maintain our wits about us in terms of challenging or growing the sector as young educated professionals, so that our client, the child, can benefit from our inputs?
Look, that's a good question. And my first advice normally to young teachers is just make sure that before you do anything else, that you are the best teacher in your subject in the world. Okay? So if you're the natural science and technology teacher, nobody must teach that subject better than you. If you are the, languages teacher or the social science teacher or the math lit teacher, you've got to do it. That takes hours of preparation. It takes broad reading. It takes looking for, and let me just say this, and I've been out of Cape Town now for a while since I left to study and then worked in other parts of the country and so on. So I've been back now for about 3 years, and I have been astoundedly by the quality of young teachers that we have. There's somebody called Wiskunde Jiffy. I haven't met her yet.
Yeah. She's on tomorrow evening.
She's on tomorrow. There's this chap. Who's this chap that does this dancing as part of his? There's Kurt Menard. There's Theola Phillips, and so on. I take my hat off to these young teachers, because it tells me that in the system, you have outstanding, and there are also oldies like Antoinette and Simon Beck. There's also older teachers. But what I'm saying is the image we often have of the young teachers is irresponsible, not on the ball and so on, and that the older teachers are the ones that led the way. But the truth is, we're doing well, in terms of teaching. I can't say that is true for all teachers or all provinces, but certainly what I've seen here gives me an incredible amount of hope. So the first thing is, before you become political, do the most important political act, which is to be a bloody good teacher, so that every child is positively influenced and advanced because of your example as a teacher. Okay. The second thing is maintain a critical voice. I know that the WCD struggles with principals and teachers who express, and I wish they wouldn't. I wish they would see them as allies rather than as enemies, But also in making your protest, learn how to communicate. If you're just going to shout at the department and call them ugly names, they're not going to respond, in ways that necessarily resolve things, because people are also weak and vulnerable and so on. But make your voice heard. If I was a principal of a school today and I've never had that privilege, I would have made my voice heard about reopening schools and try to persuade people that this is actually quite dangerous now that we know kids are vectors for the disease, etc. Maintain your critical voice, be an absolute professional, and always open yourself up to continued learning. This thing we call lifelong learning so glibly as a government policy, let me tell you, I still learn. I still join webinars. I still look to other professionals in my field to aspire to. And there's nothing better than making yourself vulnerable, making yourself open to learning, because then you become better at what you do. So those would be my 3 main pieces of advice.
And as we draw to a close, I know I mentioned, what is education looking like 2021?
Man, we in deep manure. Let me tell you something. I've got an article coming out tomorrow in the Times where I've reviewed some research that projects, unfortunately, South African research as usual lags behind, but that projects 2 big studies, the impact of the lockdown on learning in reading and mathematics for the next several years. It's looking really bad. And when you think of 300,000 kids who dropped out, and I think, that's a conservative estimate, simply because schools close for a long period of time and then open on a phased basis, we are in trouble. I don't think the public knows this. This is not just a normal year. So obviously the kids in the 20% of schools, the ones that I mentioned earlier, they will do well because they switched on so easily from face-to-face to fully online and learning. But we're in trouble. I worry about all the boys in the Western Cape that dropped out. Many of them were going to drop out anyway, But being at home for such a long period of time without active instruction in many cases, it's for the long term, we are in serious trouble because the rich will get richer, if you know what I mean, and the poor walk over behind.
All right, Prof Jansen, on that note, allow me to say thank you for your time this evening. There are so many comments coming through. Unfortunately, I can't display all of them, guys. Thank you for joining us tonight, Prof. We wish you success and all the best with your studies and your work that you do in our schools and outside of the classroom. And I hope that, again, in the future, we will draw on your assistance again to come and chat to us about some of the issues that we need to unpack, because there's some wisdom in here that we can draw from. So thank you very much, sir. We wish you nothing but the best.
Thanks, Lee. And can I just say for you, I really respect you and admire you. Continue to give this platform to teachers. I think you do what the Afrikaans people call ewigheidswerk. And I want to thank you for that too.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have time for tonight. It was an absolute joy to have Prof Jansen on tonight as our esteemed guest. Tomorrow night, we have Wiskunde Juffie, Miss Lizette Boys, who will be chatting to us and sharing her insights on the whole pandemic on its own, gender-based violence, and her views on that. So tune in tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, same time, same place. My name is Lee Hoffmann, and I am, along with my team, the Western Cape Teachers Forum. Good night.